Welcome to this new season podcast from Zscaler, Cybersecurity in the Age of AI. I'm your host, David Hull, the Editor-in-Chief here at Silicon UK. Well, in this final episode of this three-part series, we're considering the concepts of defend forward and how your business can benefit from this kind of security initiative. As the threat landscape has evolved, and what does this mean for robust, agile, and flexible cybersecurity? What does this look like? Clearly, AI tools will play a part in this, but they are just one aspect of strong security stance which all enterprises must now define and maintain. The idea is to, deter and then apply many aspects of digital security. Defend forward is gaining, I think, certainly a pace and also a practical reaction to cyber threats, which all businesses, I feel, can maybe learn from. Well, again, in this final episode, I am joined by the inimitable Sam Curry, the Global VP and Chief Information Security Officer in Residence for Zscaler. Welcome for the final time, Sam.
It's good to be here. Thanks for having me, David.
It's interesting. I think the final one of these is where we, put our money on the line. What are we going to do? How are we going to use AI in security? What's that going to look like? What's your security stance? And all the rest of it. But of course, I've used a very interesting phrase right at the top of this idea of defend forward. Now, I think we ought to unpack that, and I think we ought to define it for our listeners, because obviously I've read the article. Maybe you could maybe define what that means in, the context of this conversation. So defend forward through the lens of AI security.
Okay, so first we should talk about defending forward.
Indeed.
It does not mean attacking. So just to warn people, in a military sense, very often the best defense is an offense.
Indeed.
And this doesn't mean that, but it does mean a leaning in approach. And so that spirit is here, but it's not about attacking, because I'm a firm believer that hackback isn't a good idea, at least not in this day and age. And I don't believe that companies should be squaring off against anonymous entities and sometimes entities with almost limitless budgets like nation states. It just doesn't make sense. Right? And terrorist organizations and things like that. But what it does depend on first and foremost is the right ecosystem. And so how you work with your partners and your vendors and how you perhaps approach things internally. There's this notion of red teaming, blue teaming. There's also the notion of yellow teaming, right? Which is how you build tools and innovate. So 5 things I would track: intelligence, resilience, collaboration, capabilities, and analytics. And of course, I lay those 5 out because we can come back and talk about AI with respect to those, sure, as opposed to AI in a company or AI in cybersecurity generally. But this is with respect to defend forward. And in the article you referenced, there were 6 principles. It's really 5, but you'll see what I mean in a minute. What does it mean? Let's get specific. What does it mean by forward? Well, the first is you assume you're at risk. So people say, hey, why do we have to do detection and response? I've heard people say. And it's frankly because we have an adaptive opponent who's finding their way around our stack, our kit, our processes, our people. We do the best we can. We tune. We prepare, right? We do the architecture. We do the zero trust and everything. And then we say, okay, great. Now let's assume they're in. We're not saying they're in. We're saying assume they're in, so that we lean in. That's the defending forward. We go hunting for them. Because an IT environment is enormous. It truly is. When you think about it as a space, it's very, very big. And so number 1 is assume you're at risk. And then number 2 is understand the threat. So it means, hence the intelligence piece. It means you don't just sit and wait for attacks to come to you. You try to understand the aggressors and their toolkits and their methodologies and their relationships and the geopolitical, landscape. Then collaborating across different sectors within your own sector, if you're in an industry, but also across sectors and geos. And you'll often hear people say, use intel. This is the 4th principle, using intel. But it's more than that. It's instilling a bias for action, meaning you use the intel not just to passively read it, but for the purpose of saying, so what am I going to do with it? I'm not interested in sexy dashboards. And I'm not interested in I used to joke and call it pew pew, right? It's the video game type interface where everyone goes, does a golf clap and goes, I want 3 of those. No. What are you going to do with that information? It's not interesting if it's just graphics. And then the 5th one is leveraging large scale analytics. And I think that's the AI comes in all of this, but it comes in there too.
Yeah.
And this is the 6th one now. The 6th one is go back to the first one and assume you're still at risk. And so that's the notion of defend forward. It's assume you're at risk, understand the threat, collaborate across sectors, use intelligence with instilling a bias for action,
Mm.
large-scale analytics, and assuming you're still at risk. So it's 5. One of them is repeated.
Yes, that's right. Like a feedback loop, isn't it? It goes
Yeah.
back. Yeah, back to the
And
beginning.
it's that constant mentality of we don't rest, we lean forward. And I know one day I had someone once ask me, hey, can I get a 1U recommendable security solution finally? And tell me the price for that. And I said, I would love to have a price for that. I would love to just say, bolt this thing, and even a 5U recommendable one, right? It's not happening. So one day when we have it, we don't have to take a defend forward. And one day we'll have maybe an AI that does it all for us, but that's not today.
Not today, I'm afraid. I'm afraid not, guys. If you're hoping that's not going to happen. I was going to say anytime soon, but I think we put a time frame on that. We might sort of really shoot ourselves in the foot.
Yeah, I remember the original assessment of AI.
Yeah,
said that AI would happen within a year or two. This was 60 years ago.
Absolutely,
and it took a little longer. It's that old. We didn't do this because we thought it would be easy. We did it because we had no idea how hard it would be.
Well, we forget, don't we? Wasn't it Minsky originally? It's like that, but let's that was decades, guys. Here we are, and we're still evolving this stuff. We're still thinking about it. This whole idea of defending forward. We've talked about this a lot. We've talked about
we're really understanding ourselves, by the way.
Well, ultimately, yes. And I was going to say that really what we're talking about is, again, through the lens of AI security, we're trying to, I guess, move away from reactive, aren't we? We're trying to say to ourselves, the old style of doing defense, stop them getting in, lock the door, throw away the key, is really not going to cut it today because the threat has evolved. That may be part of the solution, but it's absolutely not the core and absolutely not the foundation. So when you're talking to businesses, is that still a hard sell? That idea that the reactive approach is not going to cut it for you guys. You have to be more sophisticated than that.
Yes, but nobody self-categorizes as reactive.
Yeah.
Right. So they tend to think of themselves, I'm doing it right.
Indeed. Yeah.
And until you separate reactive from proactive and then highlight what proactive looks like, then nobody self-identifies as reactive.
Indeed. Yeah.
Right. So in itself, that can be an offensive thing to do. What you've got to do is have them come to that conclusion. Right. So it's only once you've made the transformation to realize that you need to be proactive and to strive for it, to realize that security isn't a static thing, but it's how you play the game. It's a health thing. It's a how well you bounce back and how well you do it every day. Not a, I had a colleague who said, when I take a look at a presentation he had for the business, and I was expecting to see a risk profile. And instead I got a patchwork of tools.
Interesting. Yes.
This notion of, well, if I just do this check and this check and this check and this check, it adds up to security. No. That's hard work, by the way.
Absolutely.
And it's smart, and they know the things they have to do. But once you get past that and you flip it around, then you come at it from the other way of saying, why am I doing it? What are the risks I can accept and not accept? We're not just pursuing a gold standard in cyber. We're trying to actually get to the right type of risk mitigation. And then what's the cyber that goes with that? That's one of the problems with compliance. Compliances and regulations, the wonderful thing about them is they make us do things we wouldn't otherwise do, and they wake the business up. The unfortunate thing is they go from prescriptions up. And they say, hey, if you just do these things, you're doing okay. And very often they forget that, or rather, those who follow them only forget that we're not here to fill in a series of checkboxes.
I think it's also there's also a point, I think, where businesses they kind of have an epiphany, don't they? That they suddenly, however they got there, the switch goes on, and they go, "I get it, and I understand how my mindset, my tools, my workforce, my process has to change, my infrastructure, and the whole lot which fits into the equation." But to get to that day, I guess the most secure businesses have had that epiphany. But I would guess that from your point of view, it's not enough, guys. Not enough businesses have had that epiphany yet.
And they can backslide. So you can have the epiphany. And
absolutely.
Then
absolutely.
A couple changes in leadership, right? A couple of...
we're not doing that. The cost center is ridiculous. We're not doing that anymore. Sorry, but that's just been switched off.
That's right. I mean, there's a very, I won't mention who it was, but there was a very visible breach and a big brand in the headlines. And everyone said, how could they do that? How could senior management behave that way?
Yeah.
And I remember 7 years before it being the number one item at the board and the C-level, where they brought a number of independent people in to speak about the subject because they cared deeply. In a space of 7 years, they went from cyber being a board and C-level number one driver to being out in the wings.
Yeah.
7 years it took.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's for me, that's the worrying stuff. That's the stuff, I guess, for if you're someone in the, if you are a threat actor, that's music to your ears.
It really is, isn't it? I mean, by the way, you almost the conspiracy theorist in me almost says, I wonder if they sometimes play that up.
Well,
right? I mean, certainly for the
you
bigger
wouldn't probably pass them, would you? Really?
No, and you know, I spoke with a customer the other day who said, I'm not seeing many attacks. I don't know how necessary this is anymore. Not realizing there's a flock or herd-like behavior that happens. I mean, it's not like the weather, right? Where the weather is the weather, and your weatherproofing, you can see, it was worth the storm proofing because then we had a big storm and it saved us. No. If you put hacker proofing up, the hackers are not going to go and waste their resources on you. They'll do little tests. And if you take down that hacker proofing, they come back. It's like throwing food out for seagulls. One or two arrives and the whole flock lands.
Absolutely.
And when the food's gone away, it leaves. But one or two will come back and check every now and then. And that's exactly what the hackers do.
That's right. And often I have these conversations with security professionals, and they often talk about not attacks. They don't like that word much. They're really talking about intrusions.
Probes, almost, yeah.
Yeah, probes, intrusions, these kinds of things. And the scariest stuff, of course, is that a lot of the threat actors have learned that they can get into a system and they lurk for months in some cases. That's the scary stuff, I think, that moves businesses massively towards the kind of defend forward approach that we've been outlining, because they realize that, have we been compromised? We just don't know. It's that risk, that idea that the threat is invisible. We can't see it. We can't defend against it. Well, guys, chances are there's an element of that already happening.
Yeah, there's by the way, you're completely right. There's this notion of living off the land, which is a term we don't use very much for a very strange reason, and we'll touch on that. There's also something called living off trusted sites that one of my colleagues, Tony Ferguson, is writing about these days. But the reason is this: we have had the low, steady, the ATP, the APT, Advanced Persistent Threat, that was doing this and living off the land, which means using tools in situ that aren't going to set off alarms. They've been eclipsed because ransomware has become this tidal wave. And so we think it's gone away, but it hasn't. They're doing exactly the same and slightly more than they used to do. But the existential threat and visibility of the ransomware that can come in and hit you for tens of millions, damage your brand, inflame your board and shareholders, that is much more overwhelming and driving security budgets. So you forget, hey, we might also be the target of nation state attacks. And that's just as present, if not more so than before. And this is where the AI piece comes in. On attack, those tools are creating more effective 0 days. They're actually even before AI, machine learning is being used and automation is being used to automatically develop attacks, at which point they're beachheads for the truly insidious to push through the networks in that more living off the land way, blending in with the natural trafficking tools.
Indeed.
And that's why you have to lean forward. And I joke sometimes with people. I said, here we are counting failed logins, right? Because that's what compliance says we need to do. But I said, bad guys don't fail logins.
No.
I mean, they fail the logins when they want to distract you and have you pat yourself on the back. We stopped the bad one today.
Yeah, it's gone. Yes. Hey.
Right. But that's to distract you from the fact that they're sneaking in the other side. They get the logins right.
Absolutely. Yeah. People forget that they are well versed in how to do multi-level attacks and how to do multi-channel attacks. That whole idea that we'll do a little bit of social engineering, we'll do a little bit of maybe brute force attack as well.
Yeah.
And you need to defend all of these aspects. It's not just a linear approach anymore.
Yeah. So this brings us to the AI in defense.
Or defense, because again, how are you going to defend against that if the threat actors are absolutely camouflaged? Yeah.
So we used to have this notion in machine learning of overlearning. Machine learning meaning it's adaptive. It's not just, it responds to the environment and to the data in how it's going to process things. And there's many different ways of doing machine learning.
Indeed.
But what can happen is, so take something like naive Bayesian analysis in the anti-fraud world. It learns which things are predictors of fraud, and it can overlearn. In other words, it can have trouble adapting to new patterns in fraud and take a while to catch up. So what you do is you have a short historical window, and you drop the old learnings so that you can adapt to the new movement. So if the bad guys actually can adapt faster than your learning period, they can start to steal more.
Indeed.
Now, this notion applies with AI as well, and it applies to the people using the AI. Because if you are used to a queue that's curated by AI, and the bad guys know it, then they can just keep that AI satisfied with the material that they know you're training it with.
They can you become blind to the attack.
Yeah, you wind up in a rut. So back in the day, do you remember the book and the movie Hunt for Red October?
Yeah.
This is from Submariners. There's this notion of a crazy island, which is submarines can hide in the wake of another submarine or another ship.
Yeah.
And so every now and then you have to do a pseudo-random turn to see if something's in your wake, like what's behind you. And you have to do the same thing in the case of either human or machine overlearning, because while you're patting yourself on the back for dealing with the queue of things brought to you, you have to say, what am I not seeing that wasn't brought to me?
Indeed.
So you've kind of got to think inside. This is the defend forward mentality. So you can actually have AI giving you the things you have to do, but you should potentially have AI and humans thinking about what else, if I presume that everything I'm seeing is what I'm meant to be seeing, and it might be being manipulated. If I presume that I have a breach that's happened or somebody's present, what else should I go look at right now? What's that crazy Ivan to go check it?
So for you, I guess the best kind of pen testing or the best security professionals are massively paranoid.
Massively paranoid, but also it's a deep skepticism. And by the way, some of these people can be really annoying culturally. But I also champion neurodiversity.
Oh God, yes.
The reason for
pattern recognition and all that. It's amazing.
They think differently.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the reasons that we often hire people is because they're agreeable and because they have a high EQ, and you need that. But sometimes we need the person with autism or on the spectrum. We need the person with ADHD or Tourette's. They connect things differently.
They do. Yeah, they do.
And that's the one sometimes it's going to make the whole team behave that way a bit. And, I think we need to do more for diversity in many dimensions, but one of them is neurodiverse as well. And maybe we need to start thinking about neurodiverse AI as well. I'm so tongue-in-cheek with that, but
that's an interesting one. Yeah,
I'm tongue-in-cheek with that because we want to make sure the AI behaves in predictable ways. But
never connected those two together before. That's an interesting one. Yeah.
Well, so that might be the answer to overlearning to some degree, which is, and when I said earlier we're sort of learning about ourselves, I actually meant the AI challenges required us to understand cognition in ourselves better, but also there's been research in AI actually becomes tremendously more effective when it has an inner dialogue, or when you get adversarial AIs, like 2 and 3 party AIs that are playing games. They evolve what they do better. And so it's this, it's when is emergent intelligence more effective? And it's not when we used to think.
It's a different beast, I think. It's certainly not something you see in the movie or anything. It's not that. It's an evolving. Well, it's an evolving intelligence. Absolutely, it really is. And that's kind of the future. I also wanted to ask you. You touched on it briefly. This whole idea of we want to automate as much of this as possible. Now, when you hear that from people that you speak to, do you roll your eyes?
I have a gut reaction. Yeah.
Do you roll your eyes and go, yeah, okay, you'd love to be able to do this again? Have some kind of AI in place that will do all this wonderful stuff for you, and that just literally, I feel that moves the responsibility onto the machine and not you, and it's your responsibility, not the machines.
Yeah, you're right on that. But my first response is as an IT person and an ops person, I know that automation is the key to efficiency and to getting waste out of systems. So I understand it, right? And this is one of the first lessons in business.
I get the driver, but I think the understanding is different, isn't it?
So I did a paper with a gentleman named David Berliner, who's a brilliant guy. It must be 7 years ago now, called Mirror Chess. And it was an advanced paper at RSA conference, and then we did some derivative work and research on it. So the game of chess, you can play chess in a way that is mirroring your opponent. And this is a disastrous way to play chess, because chess is not a symmetric game as you might think. There's asymmetry in time. You take turns one at a time, not at the same time. And there's asymmetry in the board. You always have a white square on your right. And the pieces, there's asymmetry. The queens always face each other. They're not diagonally opposed or what have you. So there's asymmetry in the game. And that means that when your opponent makes a move and you copy it, they have the opportunity to exploit whatever weakness is opened up by that move before you do. And that's what happens. When someone realizes you're mirroring them, they will maneuver you into a lethal move. So that was the premise of this, and we explored it in a cyber context with chess as an analogy. Any form of automation, when you have an intelligent opponent, becomes a weakness. And so what you need, so then we actually gave solid advice. If people want to go look it up, you can look up Mirror Chess, Sam Curry, David Berliner, and you'll find the papers and write-ups and stuff. There are ways to do it. It is micro automation. In other words, you do it where there is inefficiency or waste in the system in small areas that are harder to exploit, but you still have it in a total system that you have accountability and responsibility for. That's what goes through my mind, David. And then there's the notion of introducing AI, which isn't actually automation, because automation usually has a predictable set of inputs, has a predictable set of outputs. And the very definition of AI is that if you actually go look at ChatGPT and you give it the same prompts, it won't give you the same responses twice.
Yeah, indeed.
Right. And there's reasons for that, but it is adaptive and what have you. It's a different type of computer science or programming. It's built on the same principles. So when you introduce AI into a world, it isn't actually automation. It's another set of tools that can get you efficiencies, but you have to know its limitations too. And it can likewise be abused. We've seen this in the case of hallucination, where if you ask it to write something, it will invent a library for source code that, if it's writing code for you, and that library may not exist. But if you know the prompts someone will use, the library name could be fairly predictable. So if as an attacker, you go ahead and create that library so that when you go and compile that source code, that library will be included from a Git repo, for instance, or from open source. And now there's kleptography going on, and that's happened.
So ultimately, that seems to me to be that's a lot to take on board if you're a business trying to navigate all of that. I mean, it seems to be almost almost an indefensible stance. So my business.
It does seem overwhelming.
Yeah, it's overwhelming.
You don't have to do it all everywhere all at once.
That's what I was going to ask you. You just touched on that, and I think the takeaway here, if you're looking at Defend Forward as maybe a strategy for your business, is look after the small stuff
and look after the real stuff that you see. We often talk about absolutes. This doesn't happen all immediately, for all that it feels fast.
Yeah, it's not thing you got to do. Don't think this is a huge thing we have to put in place. It's going to be a massive piece of work. Look at your business in detail. Do all of that work first, and then maybe look for the chinks in your armor and fix the chinks. And over time, that will have a cumulative effect. And I think your security stance will absolutely improve. You will have better infrastructure because you would have changed that. You'd have educated your workforce. You'd have changed how you do things, process, for instance. Those kinds of easy wins. Because I think often we have these kind of conversations, and it's we're going to employ an AI to do all this for us, and how do we actually deploy that, and all the rest of it. But it's really about understanding what's next for you. What's important? What are the crown jewels? Let's look at those first. Let's protect that before we start looking at everything else. Don't try and do it all at once, guys, because I think eventually you'll have massive amounts of inertia, and you won't get anywhere.
Yeah, I actually think if we go from first principles, what your typical security leader should do is focus on being perceived as a business person first, and get involved with the AI strategy for the company.
Yeah, get involved. It's not. This is not an IT exercise, guys. It's not.
It's not. Then actually have a beautiful finance and budget strategy. You don't have to be the guy, the man or the woman that does it, but you have to be having a conversation with the finance department and the CFO,
Indeed.
And you have to be doing things like moving from CapEx to OpEx to get more agility. You have to be simplifying your stack and getting rid of reducing the spend on commodities. And you have to be placing bets in new technologies that reduce risk. You have to get that yellow team. You have to get that notion of development to bring new tools to bear, not just from the vendors that sell to you
Indeed.
or that sell you the marketing fluff, but actually experimenting in how to do this stuff, depending on the size of the company. And if you're in a smaller company, you may look at others in your peer group and work with the community. And then you get to, so how do I set up the right processes? And the great thing about defending forward is it is a strategy. And we already know from the bottom up, you should be thinking framework, and you should be thinking control set, and you should have a risk registry, by the way, before anything else. It's not about a patchwork of tools. It's about which risks you do. But the dialogue with the business is going to change what you do. And if that's not being done, it's not just an exercise in ideal security. Now we say, how does AI improve efficiency? How does AI improve output and result? Because what is a pound of security? You have to think about, what are we doing for the business?
Absolutely. I think that idea, what you're basically talking about, sort of, self-starter, self-service. It's not. This is not a shiny box you buy off a shelf, guys. It's not. It will have elements of that, as you say. For smaller businesses, it may be a partnership with a group or a community or a group of vendors. But ultimately, it's what you guys are then going to do with that, because it's bespoke for you. I like that idea of, you move forward yourself, and you don't, again, offset the responsibility to someone else. It's yours.
That's it.
And it's how you build it yourself.
Now, your AI strategy, it may be the thing you want to get to, but it's actually the precipitate or the result of everything we just listed.
That's the end game. Yeah.
That's the end game. So you start with this stuff to get to your AI strategy before you speak to a single vendor or talk about a single technology. Because if you flip it around, you're asking the question, what could I do with this technology? That's the wrong approach. I had years ago, let's go 20 years back, right? This is, so it's safe territory. We had NAC-NAP, right? Which was about access control and something called self-defending networks. And I had somebody at a show stood up. They were from a hospital, and they said, well, I'm deploying, NAC. And where should I start? I have 30,000 computer medical organization. Where should I start? And I did not mean to put this person on the spot. It was a panel. And I asked this person in the audience, well, why are you doing it? And they didn't have an answer, David.
Yeah.
And it was because the vendor was doing a refresh of their hardware, and they were convinced they had to find an application. Now, there were perfectly good reasons to do NAC, but they had bought into the fact that NAC had to be done, and then that meant they had to go refresh their hardware.
Yeah, sure.
As opposed to, what do I care about? And is NAC a thing I need?
Well, in that context, the question why is so important. I mean, it's loaded, absolutely, but asking yourself,
you shouldn't be speaking to a vendor unless you're just seeing what's possible and thinking, how does this fit what I want to do? Not, how can I use this?
Yeah, and please do take that away. I think everyone that's listening, please, put yourself in that situation. Do not be led. You're the driver. It's your business. You understand what you need to achieve, what your strategy is. If you're trying to look at elements of Defend Forward and what that means for AI security and all, and how that heady mix can maybe work for your business. But ultimately, it's your business. That's what it's about.
And it's okay to hear about what the art of the possible is.
Oh, please!
And therefore,
have those conversations. Yeah, absolutely.
How does it let me rethink my strategy? That's fine. But simply saying, "Oh, I like that. Let me find a way to do it." When you haven't connected it to a business driver, and remember, when you do these things, there's going to be some degree of friction or pain. Why are you doing it? Is the most important question.
Absolutely. Now, usually at the end of these kinds of series, I ask about future. I ask about how you see the landscape evolving. Obviously, this series we've talked about sort of AI and security, how that connects together. This episode we've sort of unpacked Defend Forward as a strategy. That's something I think everyone could have a look at.
Yeah.
But if you look into the future, and I think when we're talking about AI security, we're not talking distant future, are we? We're talking a few years.
Yeah, the future is coming faster than ever before.
Absolutely. It's rushing towards us at a ridiculous pace. I think what everyone would like to do is be prepared. I think that's really what you're trying to do, isn't it? Put stuff in place which works today. It's also going to be, it's going to help us to be prepared and have a level of resilience for the future. Any advice you could sort of give us as a closing comment, Sam?
Yeah, I mean, the best I can think of is it's about framing.
Okay.
And we tend to have this skeptical mind, but that doesn't mean pessimism. So I don't want people to think that just because we're skeptics and we tease things apart and we like to see how they work, that means that we're pessimistic or we think things are going to turn out badly. We've got to avoid the FUD. My advice generally is be a business person first and realize that skeptical mind is an asset. It is like the business person who knows how to disassemble the operating line, or the IT person that knows really how to service the business with the infrastructure, right? That's what we're doing in cyber, but we have to be business people first. We have to keep that skeptical mind and lean forward. And we got to roll up our sleeves and get into the business conversations. And we don't have to be everything everywhere all at once. So track the trends, think about which ones are more likely to come sooner rather than later, and respond to what is imminent and likely. And sometimes there's things that will disrupt us, and we have to respond to those. But it's the old Stoic philosophy of deal with what you can deal with. And I add to that sometimes some of these worldwide issues that seem something you can't deal with. You can turn them into things you can. I give this example. If there's a hurricane coming, right, the Stoics would say you can't stop the storm, but I'd say you can get out of the way of it.
Yeah, absolutely. You can be prepared. You can do as much as you can do to defend against what you can see today. If you can see it, you can defend it. I guess you can do something.
And this is where that zero trust comes in, right? This is
all of these things.
Get the options off the table for the attacker. Just get them off.
Yeah, do that first, and then you've taken a huge step forward to be more secure. And in the future, well, try and be as agile as you can. Try and be as flexible as you can. So if something does come completely from left field, maybe some new version of ransomware, who knows? You are prepared, or at least you're along the road and you understand that how business can maybe pivot or change. And now security is agile enough to be able to either defend against that, or at least reduce the impact. And we have a level of mitigation which really protects our business. I think ultimately that's it. If you can
no one likes change, right? No one likes change.
It's hard. I know. It's a hard thing.
This is the framing thing.
Yeah.
Everyone loves innovation, right? So you have to rethink it that way. And I think it's a leadership challenge more than it is a management challenge in many ways.
Indeed, I think all of this I always feel comes top down. If you're a business leader, then it's part of your job to look at this and lead your business towards a more secure future. I think that's ultimately what we've tried to sort of unpack in this series. Well, as I said, unfortunately, we've run out of time for this episode, and indeed this series, Sam. So I'm afraid it's curtains for us until the next time. As I said previously, if you do want to learn more about how your business can enhance its security with practical application of AI, then please do visit Zscaler.com for more insights and begin your enterprise's journey towards a more AI-enhanced, secure future. Again, I'd like to thank Sam for his expert insights over these 3 episodes. Till this next time, it's goodbye from me and goodbye from Sam.
Goodbye, folks, and thanks again.